You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we preview the Ashes between Australia and England. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the fixture for this Ashes series. The first test match will be played at the Gabba on the 8th of December. The second test match will be played at the Adelaide Oval on the 16th of December. The third test at the MCG will be played on Boxing Day, the 26th of December. The fourth test will be played at the SCG on the 5th of January. The fifth test match was meant to be scheduled in Perth at the new stadium. That's been moved. So Cricket Australia have confirmed that the Perth Stadium will not host the fifth test match. So that will be played on the 14th of January, the fifth test. Where it will be played remains to be seen. So that's the Ashes fixture for this Ashes series. Let's have a look at the test stats between Australia and England in Ashes series and in Test cricket. Head-to-head in test matches overall, Australia 136 wins, England 108. Both teams' records in test matches in Australia. Australia have won 95 test matches to England's 57 test matches. Leading run scorer, Don Bradman with 5,028 runs. Leading wicket taker, Shane Warne with 195 wickets. Most dismissals, Ian Healy with 135. Most catches, Ian Botham with 54. Most matches, Sid Gregory with 52. The first test match played between Australia and England was back in 1877. So those are the test stats between Australia and England. Let's have a look at both Australia's and England's Ashes squads and talk about the challenges that will face both teams in this Ashes series. Let's have a look at Australia's Ashes squad and talk about some of the challenges faced at Australia in this Ashes series. Their squad is Cummins, Smith, Carey, Green, Harris, Hazelwood, Head, Khawaja, Labuschagne, Lyon, Nessa, Jai Richardson, Stark, Swepson, and Warner. Now, the biggest challenge faced at Australia in this Ashes series is Pat Cummins becoming captain. Now, Pat Cummins is an inexperienced captain. This is his first big series as captain. Now, we all know why he was given the captaincy for obvious reasons, and we're not going to go into that. So this is going to be a big test of Pat Cummins' captaincy early on in his captaincy career. Now, obviously, a lot of people disagreed with him being captain because he's a fast bowler. Now, we always have this perception in the game that fast bowlers can't be good captains. And I think that's rubbish, that perception that we have. Fast bowlers can be good captains. They read and understand the game really well. Their job as bowlers is to set fields and work out the tactics to get batsmen out. That's their job. And Pat Cummins, I think he'll do a very good job with the tactical side of the game, reading the game and understanding that side of the game. So I don't think he'll have any problems with that side of the captaincy. Obviously, Pat Cummins is a good leader. He has leadership qualities and understands the game really well. So I think Pat Cummins would do well as a captain with the tactical side and trying to work all that stuff out. But the biggest challenge for Pat Cummins in this series is getting the balance right between not over or under bowling himself. Because most fast bowler captains or any bowler captain, they will tend to over bowl themselves. And if that happens, they'll tend to tire out and fatigue quicker. Or if they under bowl themselves, then they're not going to be effective in the game. So for Pat Cummins, he's got to try and get that balance right between the two. And I think this will be the biggest challenge facing him in his captaincy in this Ashes series. Trying to get that balance right between not over bowling himself or under bowling himself. And this is where Steve Smith's role as the vice-captain will play a big part with Pat Cummins in his captaincy. Because Smith can go up to him and say, Pat, maybe it's time for you to have a rest. we get someone on from your end or something like that. So Steve Smith's role as vice captain is going to be very pivotal for Pat Cummins in this Ashes series. And also Steve Smith's role is going to be very important as well in terms of the tactics and setting the fields and all that. Because when Pat Cummins is bowling, Steve Smith will be most likely setting the fields and doing all that stuff, whereas Pat Cummins doesn't have to worry about that. So it's going to be a real challenge for Pat being captain, but I think he'll do a very good job. As I said before, he's very knowledgeable, he understands the game well, he understands the tactics and what fields he wants to set to get batsmen out. So by having that bowler mentality, he can be very good in the tactical side of the game and can do very well there. But the biggest challenge for Cummins, as I said before, is trying to get the balance right between not over-bowling himself or under-bowling himself. Everything else, I think he'll do a very good job, and I think he'll rise to the challenge. Now, the other challenge for Australia in this series is their batting and the expectations from fans and experts within the game. Now, the Australian batsmen are expected from everyone that they are expected to score big runs up against this England bowling attack, who are quite weak and less effective in Australian conditions. And many people expect Australia just to walk all over them and score big runs. So obviously Smith, Warner and Labuschagne will be heavily relied on Australia in this series. It's no secret that those three are Australia's best batsmen. And you are going to rely a lot from them. Especially Steve Smith. Out of those three, you're going to be relying on Steve Smith more than ever. If they score runs, Australia will most likely dominate the series. If they get out early and don't score runs, then it will be hard for Australia to post big scores and dominate in the series. And below Smith, Warner and Labuschagne, there are a few question marks on Australia's batting. Marcus Harris, obviously at the top of the order. Travis Head, Cameron Green and Alex Carey, who's on test debut in this first test at the Gabba. There are a few question marks over them in terms with the bat. Some people disagreed with those selections and they wanted Kawasha to come into the side to bat at number 5 or open the batting. He would have been a better choice. But the selectors have selected Harris, Head, Green and Carey. And for those batsmen in particular, they need to contribute and do their role within this batting lineup for Australia, because Australia need them to be contributing, because you can't rely on 3 players all the time. And most cricket teams rely on their best players anyway to get runs and wickets. But for Australia, the whole team and the whole batting unit needs to contribute. Obviously, Smith and Warner and Labuschagne are going to score runs every test match. That's a given. They are going to score a 50 or 100 every game. But the other batsmen need to contribute. So that's very important for Australia's point of view with the bat, is that Harris, Head, Green and Carey contribute. If they score runs, and Smith and Labuschagne and Warner score runs as well, then Australia will dominate this series and should post big scores in the first innings or chase down any total that England set. So that's the biggest challenge for Australia facing them in this Ashes series with the bat. The other challenge that Australia have in this series is trying to stay fresh with the bowling group, meaning trying to manage the bowlers' workloads. That's going to be the biggest challenge for Australia. We saw last summer that the bowlers against India were getting tired towards the end of the series. They weren't as effective in the last 2 test matches in Sydney and in Brisbane, and weren't able to get the job done and bowl out India on the last day of those 2 test matches because they were fatigued and tired. And naturally, when you play 4 test matches straight, or in this case in the Ashes series, 5 test matches straight, you are naturally going to fatigue and tire. And the expectations on this Australian team in this Ashes series, especially the bowling department, is to knock over this England batting lineup cheaply. But Australia would not like to repeat what happened against India last summer. So they may do some rotation. That will depend mainly on conditions, situation of the series, and how the bowlers pull up after each test match. They did rotate the bowlers in 2019 in that Ashes series in England, but that was based on conditions in England. This is in Australia, so it's a different ball game. So Australia need to get the workload management right and not make the same mistake as they did against India. And I think Cameron Green will play a very big part in Australia's bowling attack. Now, Cameron Green's in the side as an all-rounder. There for his batting, but also there for his bowling. And his overs are going to be very important for Australia in terms of resting Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, and even Nathan Lyon at times. You need someone else to come on and bowl those overs. So Cameron Green will probably need to bowl maybe 20 overs maximum per innings to give the other bowlers a rest. Obviously, last summer he struggled with the ball, didn't quite get the wickets. Obviously, he's learning, he's developing his skills. He's 22 years old, so he's got a lot of years ahead of him. He's just starting to get into the groove of Test cricket. So if Cameron Green can get everything right with the ball, if he can get everything working with the ball in this Ashes series and take 2 or 3 wickets a game, then he's done his job. But I think his overs are going to be very critical for Australia in terms of resting the other bowlers during the Test match, because as we saw last summer, the bowlers got tired and fatigued and didn't really have enough respite. That was down mainly to Australia's batting and mainly down to India in how they played the Australian bowlers. So England may do a similar thing where they may keep Australia out for long periods of time in the field and try and tire them out. That's what India did last summer as a bit of a tactic, and it worked. So Cameron Green is going to be very important with his overs. Also, Australia can use Marnus Labuschagne for a few overs of leg spin, if required. So they've got him up their sleeve as well. So those are few of some of the challenges that Australia may face in this Ashes series for 2021-22. Let's have a look at England's Ashes squad and talk about some of the challenges facing England in this Ashes series. Their squad is Root, Anderson, Bairstow, Bess, Broad, Burns, Butler, Crawley, Hamid, Lawrence, Leach, Malan, Overton, Pope, Robinson, Stokes, Wokes, and Wood. Now, the challenges facing England in this series are pretty obvious. Number 1 is their batting, trying to score runs, and number 2 is their bowling, trying to take 20 wickets. Let's talk about the biggest challenge of them all, is the batting side of things. Now, the biggest challenge facing England's batsmen is not facing the Australian bowlers, but with their minds. And what I mean by that is their mental side of their game. A topic we don't often talk about enough in the game of cricket, the mental side. We tend to focus on technique, worry about that, but we need to work on the mental side, and it's a very important part of the game that all players shouldn't ignore and have to work on. For England to win this Ashes series, they need to score 400 to 450 in the first innings, you think. And to do that, you need to bat for long periods of time. To be able to bat for long periods of time, you need to have great mental skills to do that. For England, they need to be mentally tough and resilient with the bat. But in the last 2 Ashes series, they haven't had that mental toughness or resilience and have crumbled under the pressure caused by Australia. Now, in 2010-11, the last Ashes series win that England won in Australia, they did show that mental toughness and resilience and were able to bat for long periods of time and post big scores in the first innings, and they went on to win that series 3-1. If England can show that mental toughness and resilience in this series with the bat, then they have a chance of being competitive and looking to win some Test matches. But it's very important for England is to make sure that their mental side of their game's in check. As I said before, the biggest challenge is not facing the Australian bowlers, but it's with the England batsmen's minds. If they can get their mental side right and try and show that mental toughness and resilience with the bat and look to grind out innings and look to tough out the tough periods, then they are a good chance of being competitive and posting big scores. So it's very important that they need to work on their mental side. They need to have good routines mentally and good methods to deal with concentrating for long periods of time, looking to bat for long periods of time. It's easier said than done to bat all day for 6 hours, but you need to have great concentration and focus and a great mental side. And the last 2 series, England have struggled in that department. They haven't been able to have a good mental side, good mental routines or methods to combat Australia's bowlers and bat for long periods of time. Their concentration hasn't been that good, or their focus. So for England, they need to do that. That's the biggest challenge facing them in this series with the bat. So they need to work on their mental side, because as we say in the game of cricket, the game of cricket is 90% mental, 10% skill. And you need the 90% to excel with the 10%, which is the skill. And that's what England need to work on in this series. Also, they're going to rely on Joe Root and Ben Stokes quite heavily, but those two can't do it alone. And they need support from the rest of the batting lineup. It's not certain that Joe Root can continue his great form in 2021 with the bat, despite Ben Stokes showing promising signs in the nets, I should say, and in the warm-up matches. It's not certain that Ben Stokes will have a great series. Nothing's certain in the game of cricket, so England can't rely on Root and Stokes. The likes of Burns, Butler, Crawley, Hamid, Lawrence, Malan, Pope, these guys need to step up and pull their socks up and contribute to this England team with the bat. Now, England's batting is quite fragile and quite weak. All of them are basically averaging 30 and below. The only one who's averaging 50 plus is Joe Root. So that's not good signs there. So they need to contribute and try and score some runs in this series, because if they don't, it's going to be a lot of pressure on Root and Stokes to carry the team and score big totals for England. So if they can improve their mental side, as we talked about before, and the other batsmen can contribute, then England have a good chance of scoring big runs if they can get those 2 areas right with their batting. So that's the biggest challenge for England with the bat. Their mental side and the other batsmen trying to contribute and take the load off Root and Stokes. Let's talk about their bowling. Now, obviously, the biggest challenge facing England's bowlers is how to take 20 wickets on these flat surfaces with a kookaburra ball that doesn't do much, doesn't swing, doesn't seam, doesn't deviate off the straight. So England have a talented bowling lineup, which is pretty good in English conditions. Whether they're good enough to take 20 wickets in Australia is another thing. England are missing that express fast bowler in Australia that you need to be effective on these flat surfaces. They do have Mark Wood in the side, who is a very quick bowler. But with Mark Wood, he's prone to injury, and England will need to manage him carefully in this Ashes series. But Mark Wood can be that impact bowler for England, if used in short, sharp spells by Joe Root, and he can make something happen for England on these flat surfaces. But they are dearly missing Jofra Archer and Ollie Stone, who have that raw pace. Both of them would have been useful here in Australia, but unfortunately both of them are injured. So England will need to come up with different ways to take 20 wickets on these surfaces in Australia. They need to come up with different variations with the ball. And I think the only way for England to have success with the ball is to bowl a consistent line and length and hope to build pressure up that way and cause the Australian batsmen to make mistakes that way. England will leak runs with the ball, but they need to build pressure and to control the flow of runs when bowling. So that will be the biggest challenge for England. If they can bowl a consistent line and length, cause pressure that way, build pressure that way on the Australian batsmen and hope they make a mistake, then England have a good chance of taking wickets. But if they don't, they are going to go for a lot of runs and concede a lot of runs in these test matches. Certainly in the last couple of series, they've struggled with the ball. They have taken wickets, but they've conceded a lot of runs by doing that. So the thing for England is they need to stop the flow of runs and build pressure that way. And hope the Australian batsmen make mistakes and get them out that way. Obviously, Jack Leach's role is going to be very important for this England team, being the main spinner. Australia's a very tough place to bowl spin, and this is Leach's first Ashes series in Australia. So for him, he will need to bowl a lot of overs for England and take wickets and control runs if he can. If he can do that, then he's doing his job. But if he can't do that, as we've seen in the last series in Australia in 2017-18, when Moeen Ali bowled, I think Moeen Ali took 5 wickets and averaged 115. So it just shows you how tough it is to bowl spin in Australia if you don't get it right. So Jack Leach's role is going to be very pivotal in this England bowling lineup. So those are some of the challenges facing England with both bat and ball in this Ashes series. Let's preview the first Ashes test from the Gabba. Let's have a look at both teams' stats at the Gabba in test matches and both teams' first Ashes test potential 11s. Let's have a look at both teams' stats at the Gabba in test matches. The first test match played between Australia and England at the Gabba was back in 1933. 21 matches, 5 draws. Australia won 12 test matches to England's 4. Let's have a look at both teams' potential 11s for the first Ashes test. We'll start with Australia. Now, Australia's already named their 11. So their 11 for this first test is Warner, Harris, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Green, Carey, Cummins, Stark, Lyon and Hazlewood. That's Australia's 11 for the first test match. Now, there was a lot of debate on Harris, Head and Carey being in the side. The selectors have backed Harris to open the batting. They have backed Travis Head over Khawaja to bat at number 5. And they've backed Alex Carey to be the keeper, obviously making his test debut and replacing Tim Paine. So Australia's already named their 11, so that's their 11 for the first Ashes test at the Gabba. Let's have a look at England's potential 11 for this first Ashes test at the Gabba. Burns, Hamid, Malan, Root, Stokes, Pope, Butler, Wokes, Leach, Broad or Robinson and Wood. Now, it's been confirmed that James Anderson will not be playing this first Ashes test at the Gabba. Some news came out that he probably injured his calf, which was the news that did come out. But soon the ECB confirmed that James Anderson wasn't carrying any sort of injury. And with 5 test matches being played in 6 weeks, the plan was to get him ready for the second test in Adelaide. So James Anderson's not injured. England are taking a conservative approach with him. And obviously it was expected that James Anderson wasn't going to play all 5 test matches. So that's been the case here. He's not been named in the 11 for the first Ashes test. He'll most likely play in Adelaide with the day-night test, trying to get right for that. So that could be England's potential 11 for the first Ashes test at the Gabba. Let's predict who's going to win this Ashes series, leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for the series, and leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for both Australia and England. I think Australia will win the series quite comfortably in the end. I think they'll win at least 3 test matches. There may be a couple of draws in the series depending on weather and other factors. So I think Australia to win at least 3 test matches to win this Ashes series. Leading run scorer for the series, there's only one name there. Steve Smith will be the leading run scorer for the series, in my opinion. Leading wicket taker for the series, I've gone with Pat Cummins. Leading run scorer for Australia and leading wicket taker for Australia, I've just named those two just now, Steve Smith and Pat Cummins. Leading run scorer for England, Joe Root. Leading wicket taker, Ollie Robinson for England. This Ashes series is the most anticipated series yet. Australia shape up as firm favourites to retain the urn and win their 3rd successive home Ashes series. England are definitely up against it and will need to find a way in this Ashes series. But nonetheless, this Ashes series will be a cracking series as always. We will see many great battles between batsmen and bowlers and many great moments. May the best team win. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.